I kind of take the Mike Tyson approach. You know, he says everybody has a plan till they get punched in the face.
Oh, right.
So the plan becomes worthless immediately once the real world hits. So I try to get as fast as possible into some sort of coding, knowing that whatever I come up with in my mind or on a whiteboard is usually going to be like, well, that was, as soon as I start coding it, it'd be like, no, that actually sounded really good in my brain. But when it hits the real world, it ends up being tossed to the side anyhow.
Big thanks to our partners Linode, Fastly, and LaunchDarkly. We love Linode. They keep it fast and simple. Check them out at linode.com/changelog. Our bandwidth is provided by Fastly. Learn more at fastly.com and get your feature flags powered by LaunchDarkly. Get a demo at launchdarkly.com. What's up, party people? This episode is brought to you by Micro. Micro, aka M3O, is a new cloud platform built for developers by developers. Our good friend Azam Aslam is leading this. And if you're tired of AWS and feeling overwhelmed by the cloud, infinite billing, and an endless sea of docs, it is time for a change. The Micro team is reimagining the cloud for the next generation. M3O is a new developer-friendly platform to explore, search, and use simpler APIs for everyday consumption, all in one place. Get access to the APIs you need in one click and test them right there on the web before using them. Simple, fast, and affordable. You won't get burned by bottomless billing. You top up your account and pay as you go. And right now, they're in early development and building out the first set of APIs, and they're looking for feedback from developers. Sign up and get $5 in free credits. Kick the tires, give them your input so they can build the best APIs you want to use every single day. Learn more at m3o.com. Again, m3o.com.
This is JS Party, your weekly celebration of JavaScript and the web. We record live on YouTube each and every Thursday at 1 p.m. US Eastern. Subscribe to our channel for notifications at youtube.com/changelog and join in the conversation on Twitter. We are at JS Party FM. Okay, let's get right into it. Hey, it's party time, y'all. Welcome back, friends. It is JS Party time. We have a fun show for you today. I am joined by Amel and Chris. Let's talk non-dev things, maybe pre-dev. Help me understand what we're about to talk about here. It's kind of like when you're not coding, there's tons of things around the code. There's decision-making, there's design, there's architecture, there's convincing people that what you're doing is the right thing.
Aligning people.
There's collaboration. There's just many concerns that happen even before you start to code. And then you have like the coding stuff, which we talk about all the time. And then there's things that happen afterward. So maybe we'll get to the after as well. But we're going to start with like before at least. And this is a world that, Amel, you've been living in quite a bit. Decision making, what to work on, how to build it. Tell us what your thoughts are.
Yeah, Jared, this is my life, really. I mean, it feels like the longer I go in my career, the less and less code I write. And in some ways it's good, in some ways it's annoying.
Yeah.
You know, some ways it's good because, you know, like, I think the thing that's changed for me is like, you know, when you first start out and you're really excited about software and, you know, you get your first job and, you know, you get your first task, like the thing you first start doing is banging your keys on the keyboard, you know, like you go right into the code. You don't even think. And then you're thinking and coding at the same time. And like all the cycles, like you have like 20 million cycles before you get to the solution because you're like really bad at parallelizing your thought stream, right? Because it's like, it's hard to like write software and think about how you're going to write software at the same time, like to do it well. Anyways, it takes years of experience to like do that seamlessly. But, you know, so, and now, you know, the more mature you get, you realize, oh, no, you have to really design the problem, design the solution, think about it, iterate on it outside the keyboard sometimes. You know, potentially, depending on how large the problem is, you know, get feedback from colleagues, align on it so you're not arguing over in your PR. You know, you don't have like a 200 comment PR, you know, because people have opinions and you've solved it a different way. You know, so there's just so much that goes into that pre-time. So in the sense that like, I'm happy now that like I spend less time on keyboard because, you know, I know when to focus on keyboard. But I think the annoying thing comes from me in that like, the flip side of this also for me is that like, you know, being a principal, a lead engineer now, like, you're just like ahead of people and you're like in this like crazy land between engineering and product and design, like and architecture and platform and this and that, and IT, like sometimes even, and support. Like you're in this world with all these other people that aren't writing software all the time necessarily, right? Like there are other stakeholders, technical or non-technical. And like, I just like, yeah, I'm just spending a lot of time there coming up with like how we're going to do what we need to do, iterate on that, and then come to my team with a plan. You know what I mean? And then it's like, go.
What does that plan usually look like? Like what level of granularity are we talking about? Here's a bunch of specs, or here's some user stories to go work on. Or we're talking about bigger picture, like this is the direction that we're going. Give us more to hook into there.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's all of the above, quite frankly. You know, we have our kind of epic and product direction. I work at a product company. And so then it's kind of my job to like come up with like myself and other colleagues of mine that are in lead roles, like come up with essentially the architecture, the implementation, like the feasibility, what the MVP looks like, you know, what are do the trade-off analysis for like different options, you know, present that to kind of our stakeholders for feedback, get like a thumbs up there. And then when it comes down to like the actual team level, I'm involved with like, like the story creation and breakdown and like subtasks, like kind of like being a consultant on like, this is how we should do it. And then obviously from there, we iterate with the actual, you know, folks that are going to implement it. But yeah, I'm kind of involved in like both, and then even, you know, code reviewing it. And obviously at times when I get the chance these days, it's like, it seems less and less with like actually contributing to the code. But yeah, I obviously work alongside that, but I'm heavily involved with the code review process, obviously. And
what about you, Chris? Are you a grab a ticket and work on it kind of a developer? Or are you higher level decision making in the strategy of the software? What's your role usually in this?
Well, it varies. So my last job at IBM, it was more of a dev advocacy, open source engineering type role. And so I'm working with the open source communities. I'm working with maintainers and, you know, foundation peeps. And so I haven't been on a product team in really any capacity in a long time. And so I'm trying to think about how I work and how things happen in the open source world. Kind of, there are certainly quite a few differences in how work gets done, and you know who does the work and where the ideas come from and how those ideas get bounced around to stakeholders or not.
There's some interesting parallels though, Chris, which I think, you know, for example, folks thinking that like a maintainer, like the lead maintainer of a large open source project needs to have like the highest number of commits, which is completely like a very false correlation. You know, there's so much governance that goes into open source. So I think for me, there's lots of parallels with the product, like with like enterprise-y product companies, like lots of parallels. And you know, wouldn't you say?
Well, can't say I've really worked on much enterprise software, but it feels a bit like night and day to me. You know, I spent the earlier part of my career working in product companies, building products, you know, working in a team, essentially like collaborating with designers and product people and all that sort of thing. And for the past 5 years or so, it hasn't looked like that. And I prefer what I'm doing now, obviously.
Yeah. But, well, to be fair, to clarify, Chris, I meant to say that the parallels are in how the software gets made. There's still a before code phase for large new features in like widely maintained, like, you know, adopted projects, you know,
sometimes.
And that before code phase usually involves an RFC, which is very similar to kind of what I would put together as my final like proposal plan for like architecting a new set of features, you know? And so, you know, RFC, like and then you have like architecture proposal plan, like on my side. And then you have, you know, feedback on the RFC and all the discussion. And that's, you know, those are your stakeholders, is like the users of your library and the other maintainers, you know, and they contribute to that issue on GitHub, right? They have that discussion. But for me, it's a series of like 6 to 7 meetings over like, you know, 4 weeks or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, like we're not as good at async communication in enterprise land, unfortunately.
Right.
But, you know, for me, those are the parallels.
Yeah.
You know?
Most Open source projects don't have an RFC process.
Oh, I'm thinking of large scale ones,
Most-
like though, I guess. But
Right. Most are very informal.
Well, how about Mocha? I mean, that's the one that you maintain.
wouldn't you say that about startups, though?
Yeah, Mocha is really informal as well.
Yeah, I would expect it to be.
I'm spending a lot of time working with Appium lately, and it's also pretty informal, right?
But most software development is informal, though. There's like a good chunk of the internet's websites code isn't living in GitHub. Like it's like not even, it's like it's not even in source control, right? Like, most, like I think RFCs are the most formalized way, I think, in open source to collaborate on big ideas. And I would say like not every company has an architecture committee review process, right? So it's like,
Right.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at, sure. So yes, this RFC is, I can see the parallels there. I think I'm just kind of saying, well, just in my experience, the projects that I've worked with are not at that level, and that's fine. I certainly wish certain projects would have an RFC process, but things happen how they happen.
Yeah.
We should talk to GitHub about putting that as a default template or issue type or whatever. Like, I don't know. You know what I mean? Now they'll have those, like, there could be a way to do that. But anyways, hope someone from GitHub is listening.
I think lots of us are kind of in the middle versus in either extreme. It's probably more of us on the small extreme than the large extreme. But I think many of us live like on a bell curve, of like org size and infrastructure around their work. And I think Amel is probably representing the larger enterprise side where there's a lot of, let's just call it ceremony for lack of a better term, but things that need to happen.
Cogs. Just kidding.
But as developers, so I mean, all three of us here are developers, whether we're actively coding day in and day out or not. At a certain point, some sort of idea or spec or need comes to you, and you're still pre-code, right? Like, here it is. Whether it's a Jira ticket that tells you exactly what needs to happen, okay, kind of not that interesting. But most Jira tickets are written in a way that still you don't know what to do when you get it, right? You're like, okay, now I have to.
English?
Yeah, what in the heck
What
are they
this?
want here?
Qu'est-ce que ça?
So when you get that, when you have that tangible thing, which is either a need or a user story or something, right? Like, hey, we're going to add comments to the website, right? Like, there you go. Before you're coding, are there processes? Are there things that you do personally, in your dev work to figure out how you're going to attack that problem? Or is it just like break out the editor and start writing some tests or some code, or pop open, your Webpack config and just get it rocking? What do you guys do?
I actually think in my head, Chris, before he starts coding or solving any problems, like he puts on like either like super heavy metal rock music and like cracks open a can of beer, or he's like listening to classical music and smoking a cigar. It's like one of the two. And I'm trying to understand, Chris, which of the two is closer to reality? And you're going to say neither, right?
I'm a paradox.
Paradox. He's not letting
I'm
you
an
in.
enigma.
You know what? Damn it.
He's not
I
gonna
thought a
let you
direct
in.
question would be one way to find out something more about you, but now you're just even more intriguing and mysterious. Damn it. This experiment failed,
I don't know. I don't know.
Anyways.
Mystique has never really been one of my strong suits. But like, okay, my role now, a lot of my role is like this R&D, like making hypotheses and doing research, building prototypes. And that's a lot of my role right now.
No wonder you're having fun.
I'm loving it. And I get to come up with an idea, and I go and I talk to people and say, okay, is this idea a stupid idea, or is this idea something that I should build out more and see if it's worth doing? And so I'll talk to people and find out, and then I'll go either way with it. And then if they're like, yeah, it sounds like a great idea, then, well, I'm going to build my prototype. And I don't do a whole hell of a lot of thinking about what I'm going to build, because I'm trying to get in there and see what's really possible and like which direction I should really take things. It's not necessarily, hey, let's like move very fast and do things like, just barely scraping by just to get it out the door. It's not like that. It's experimentation. And yeah, that's fun. I find it like the easiest way for me to experiment is, and what makes the most sense to me is to actually build something and, throw it away and go build something else. And I throw away a lot of code. It's fine. I can live with myself, but I don't know if other people who may do more prototyping kind of do things that way. I'm pretty new to, I think, having this as a defined part of my role.
Yeah.
So if there's a better way to do it other than just like getting in there and just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks, I'm all ears.
Well, that sounds like a really fun role. I've done that some, but never like been cut loose to just, research and develop. I sure would like to. Oftentimes when I do those things, it's at the cost of something that I'm not doing, which I know I should be doing or I could be doing. So there's opportunity cost, which tends as someone who's running a small business, you tend to take the opportunity cost very highly because it's like, well, these things need to get done or else things fall apart, and these things might be great, but they're going to get dropped down. So I would love to have kind of unfettered access to idea prototyping and being able to just throw code away when it's not panning out,
Yeah, I wouldn't call it unfettered. It still needs to make sense.
Well, sure. I'm unfettered in terms of it's not that it's like a part of what your allotted work time is for.
Yes.
Yes. So you're not opportunity costing necessarily. Like, well, I have this time dedicated to this role and I'm going to do the role. And that sounds great. So you're pretty fast. So you might come up with an idea. You might throw it past a colleague or maybe your users or your customers. And then you're basically, at that point, breaking out the code and start coding.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Any whiteboarding, any diagramming or anything you do?
No.
Go ahead, Amel.
No, I said that's a super cool job. Like,
yeah.
I love that.
I'm jealous.
I'm super jealous.
Yeah.
I'm so jelly. Yeah. That's great. You'll have to tell me if you get more creative over time or less creative over time. So my deepest fear is that I'm going to run out of ideas, and I don't, I don't know if that. I'm curious how the creativity, will, because you're in a very creative role. So I'm just curious, like, if there's going to be like highs or lows, But
yeah, I don't tend to run out of ideas, but I have so many bad ideas, and that's why I need to validate my assumptions and talk with people who know better than I do.
How fast is your feedback loop? Like, when do you know your idea is bad? Are we talking within hours, within days, within weeks?
Oh, yeah. So, talk to a couple people, maybe get that done in a week or two, and just kind of get a general feeling, go and maybe build a little prototype, and then from there, it can become more formal, where there's an actual proposal. But then and I haven't gotten to this part of the job yet, but it seems like there might be a drawback where I had this idea and I've built my prototype and I've written the proposal and everybody loves the proposal and somebody else implements it, but I don't get to. And that might be a little weird for me.
Isn't it more likely that the prototype becomes the implementation? Isn't that how things usually work?
It's pretty unlikely.
Okay. Well, that's a disciplined company then.
Well, I'm not So, I work for a product company and there are people building our products, but I'm not in their division or whatever. I'm not on those teams. And so, we're fairly sequestered, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't think there's really any way I'm going to build some dumb prototype and it's going to actually show up on our website. So,
well, that's good discipline, like I said.
They are a testing company, Don't you work at Sauce Labs?
Mm-hmm.
And I know from a recent email that you guys just acquired Backtrace. Congratulations.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, did you really need to email me about that, Sauce Labs? I felt like I really didn't need to know, but now that I know, congratulations. Really exciting.
Are you also in mergers and acquisitions, Chris, or?
No.
No.
You're supposed to say no comment. You're supposed to stay mysterious.
Yeah, exactly.
One of your good ideas.
Yeah. Well, to actually answer your question, Jared,
Yes.
For me, like, there is no, like, at this point, I can't even think of the last time I was figuring out how I wanted to design the problem before writing it. So my hands don't touch the keyboard until I kind of know how I want to target this problem exactly. So my time on the keyboard is very scapular as a result of that. You know? I'm like,
Slice and dice.
I need to get from point A to point B, and it's like okay, most efficient route. Doot. That's it. And the only reason why I know what the most efficient route is, or my preferred route, is because I've thought about it in advance of writing anything or touching the keyboard.
Okay.
So yeah, so that's my, it's like required, like for me, like it's very anxiety inducing to like write code before you know exactly how you want to finish the solution end to end. So it gives me anxiety.
This episode is brought to you by Sentry. Build better software faster. Diagnose, fix, and optimize the performance of your code. Over 1 million developers and 68,000 organizations already use Sentry, including us. Sentry also recently shipped a new SDK for Next.js applications. Check the show notes for links to more details. Best of all, our listeners get the team plan for free for 3 months. Head to Sentry.io and use the code TheChangelog when you sign up. Again, Sentry.io and use the code TheChangelog.
I kind of take the Mike Tyson approach. You know, he says everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face.
Oh, right.
So the plan becomes worthless immediately once the real world hits. So I try to get as fast as possible into some sort of coding, knowing that whatever I come up with in my mind or on a whiteboard is usually going to be like, well, that was, as soon as I start coding it, it'd be like, no, that actually sounded really good in my brain. But when it hits the real world, it ends up being tossed to the side anyhow. So I'm pretty fast to just experiment and maybe just think through like some small code, using kind of a TDD flow to like design the solution and let it kind of come out somewhat organically. That doesn't mean I don't put any thought into anything. I'm not just like a head west and start coding, but rarely will I spend too much time before having something that I can at least touch and feel, intellectually.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Amala, you're building big things.
Yeah, usually, but even when I'm working on a small feature, I kind of like know exactly what I need to do before I like touch the keyboard. Like I don't like figuring it out while I'm trying to write the code. Like, I like to look at the code, know where I need to make the change, like do my research, walk around, like snoop, look for how someone else did it and see if they're, if I like see if I even need to invent the solution, I like to, is there prior art? Is there like, you got it, you don't like, otherwise you're just like reinventing the wheel or like forgetting to use a common util that already existed. And you know what I mean? Like, yeah, it pays to like do a little bit of like how I do this investigation, and literally I did not accidentally forget a word. It's literally how I do this. How do for short, like.
Okay, so maybe I spoke too brashly. Because I also do those things. Maybe I just don't think about that as planning as much as like that's part of the process. Like, do I even have to write this code? Is always a question that I'm asking,
yes,
right?
That's what I'm saying. That's
so
the first thing is that you have to be lazy.
Yeah, so I'm just kind of
not
like
only lazy, but just,
I guess I just figure that it's like dorking around time. Like I'm not actually doing anything yet, but maybe I am. I'm like formulating. Yeah,
you are. Trust me, your mind is a powerful weapon, Jared.
Thank you.
So, you are
You just made the soundboard.
You are, oh God. Of course I did. Of course. Self-serving comment. Oh my God.
Right there.
Could you just anonymize my voice? Okay, I don't want to forever be associated as like the woman is she the woman behind Jared?
Your mind is a powerful weapon, Jared.
That's my claim to fame now because you're constantly playing it. It's like ends up on all the podcasts.
That's right.
Changelog.
I just show up as a guest on other people's shows and just play that clip. Yeah.
Mind is a powerful. Yeah. Anyways, so no, your mind is constantly solving problems, and like our employers get a lot of free time from us. I mean, unpaid labor, I should say. And subconscious is it's much more absorbent than your conscious mind.
Yeah.
So even when your conscious mind is skimming,
Back when I was doing consulting, I would tell that to my potential clients. I would say, if your problems are interesting enough, I'll work for you 24/7, but I'll only charge you for the times when I'm writing the code. Because I actually can't stop thinking about it,
Exactly.
I think they like that.
So it's like a puzzle.
Yep.
Oh, we're lucky we get to solve problems for a living. So lucky us,
It's
Jared.
fun.
And
It's
Chris. The Enigma.
And Chris gets to solve problems that he devises too. He can just come up with something and solve it.
Yeah, he can make up his own stuff.
Yeah,
right?
create my own
Keep
problems.
himself employed. Yeah.
That's right. See, I create the bug and then I fix the bug.
Yeah.
I'm creating my own work.
Yeah, but the challenge with Chris's job, which is why, Chris, I'm really genuinely curious about this for you, is like, for me, it's very much you're in hard mode all the time. Like, I live my life in sprints. Like, I like working really hard for a month or 2 months and then taking like a down month where I like chill out. And I feel like when you're in R&D and you're working on this creative project and it's like, okay, one thing after another, like, I feel like you have a lot of high intensity intervals for your brain. So I'm really excited to see like, what that's like for you, like over time. You're just like, no, I'm an idea factory.
He's not going to tell you.
To mill it out.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think maybe it's just like a different style of how I prefer to work because like what's really going to stress me out is like daily stand-ups and deadlines and stuff like that. If I can provide some vague, well, I think it'll take me, this long to have something to show. And then I'm not gonna freak out about that. But like, I don't get too stressed out working this way. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, no, but like you just like hit something for me that's like so important, which, we should double click into for folks, like, especially folks who are managers that are listening to this. Please pay attention. I'll give you a minute to take out your notebooks. Okay. So Chris, like what you just said was like, I don't have all these external artificial like deadlines and pressures and like, and that's what gives me, and also just like cadence meetings, which really are very, they're more like chores than they are useful, like sometimes like stand-ups, groomings, whatever the hell else. Like I'm given this kind of unfederated control of my time and creativity. And that's because of that, like, I don't see myself really getting tired of this or just whatever. Like I'm productive and happy, like managers, whatever, like it's about output, and I really do think we have a lot of rigidity in like what we expect of engineers and their time and also like their ability to be productive. Like some people are better like at night and some people prefer writing software in the mornings or whatever. And, some people like if they have one meeting in the middle of the day, it throws their entire day off. Like makers hours are a thing and they're different than manager hours. And, I think we should be working more towards like making our makers as, happy and comfortable as possible, because writing software is an art and like you have to respect the creative brain that's required to like produce that.
This episode is brought to you by our friends at Square. For our listeners out there building applications with Square, if you haven't yet, you need to check out their API Explorer. It's an interactive interface you can use to build, view, and send HTTP requests that call Square APIs. API Explorer lets you test your requests using actual sandbox or production resources inside your account, such as customers, orders, and catalog objects. You can use the API Explorer to quickly populate sandbox or production resources in your account. Then you can interact with those new resources inside the seller dashboard. For example, if you use API Explorer to create a customer in your production or sandbox environment, the customer is displayed in the production or sandbox seller dashboard. This tool is so powerful and will likely become your best friend when interacting with, testing, or playing with your applications inside Square. Check the show notes for links to the docs, the API Explorer, and the developer account sign-up page, or head to developer.squareup.com/explore/square to jump right in. Again, check for links in the show notes, or head to developer.squareup.com/explore/square to play right now.
for this segment, we're going to be talking about a recent Dan Abramov blog post about NPM audit, which probably at this point we're all aware of NPM audit, and that's kind of one of the things this post is covering. We had some folks from NPM on the show way back when. The company that got acquired and was doing the audit stuff got it rolled out together. I can't remember the fellow's name. Very nice guy. Talking about NPM audit, but here we are. It's probably a couple of years later, and Dan Abramov says the way NPM audit works is broken. Its rollout as a default after every NPM install was rushed, inconsiderate, and inadequate for front-end tooling. He then goes on to say, have you ever heard the story about the boy who cried wolf? And we probably have heard that one, where every time he cried wolf, it was a false alarm, and then when it was finally true, his parents didn't believe him, and so the wolf ate the sheep. And Dan goes through in great detail how NPM audit works that way, mostly because there's so many false positives. They're not false insofar as it really is reporting real vulnerabilities. It's false because those vulnerabilities, for whatever reason, are irrelevant to your code in many cases. And so because of that, it's mostly an annoyance. It makes everybody's lives a little bit worse for various reasons. And it was broken by design, he says, because it was added as the default post-install deal. So curious what you two think of what Dan has to say about NPM audit itself, but also about this general software challenge of tooling that is overly noisy and ends up basically making itself useless. I mean, think of notifications and things that we build in order to notify us when there's problems, such as this, which in theory is very useful. Knowing when your code has vulnerability is very useful. But because of implementation or some of the hard problems out there to solve, end up becoming more of an annoyance, and you just ignore it. You just don't pay any attention. Like, don't pay attention to, it's like the compiler warnings, those warnings don't matter. And then when it actually has something that's real, you're no longer paying attention to it. What do y'all think?
Well, I've complained about this for a couple of years. And NPM audit itself, I don't see as being necessarily the problem, but it is part of the problem. So essentially, I think what Dan's saying in this article is, okay, somebody has paid a security researcher to go and find prototype pollution bugs in these random JavaScript libraries or what have you. Okay. And that library might be consumed by, say, a build tool. And that build tool will output code, but it doesn't really have anything to do with that vulnerability. A, the vulnerable code path might not even be hit. And B, even if it was hit, the context in which the code is running, which is a shell or a command line, is already vulnerable because it's already a shell. It's just all these warnings basically become then irrelevant. Mm-hmm. And now, why is it this way? Well, static analysis of security problems. So that's what NPM audit does. It looks and sees, is there a dependency there that has an associated CVE or whatever? And it says, yes. And that's essentially all it's doing, right? And then certain other companies that start with an S and end with a K, they do something similar, where it's let's analyze your dependencies and see which ones are broken. Mm-hmm. But as I said before, it doesn't know that you're actually using the vulnerable code, and it doesn't know where that vulnerable code will be run because it's examining code at rest. Okay? It's code at rest is not, it's a text file. Okay? Mm-hmm. It's not a security risk until it is run. Okay. And so then wherever the code is run, that's where you should worry about your attack surface, right? And so these static analysis tools are essentially too dumb to do this. And with a language like JavaScript, which is extremely dynamic, it becomes an even tougher problem. With something like, say, a Java, you may have enough type information and introspection to understand, okay, is this vulnerable code actually run. And maybe you can do that with static analysis. I don't know. Maybe it's something you want to throw machine learning at. I don't know. But the state of things now is that they just don't work very well. Most of what they're reporting is irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
And so then there's these two problems. One is this, the boy who cried wolf, right? Mm-hmm. Where you're confronted with all this noise and all these warnings, and you eventually ignore them. The other one is the people who are in these maybe enterprise companies or whatever, where the security or IT has mandated that the code must pass these audit checks.
Right.
You mean basically hell.
Right.
Hell for most of us.
But they exist, right? And so you have to pass these audit checks. You must make sure that...
And you can understand from a higher up perspective why that's like a good decision, you know?
Sure. And the way NPM works, and I don't know, maybe you can get around this problem with Yarn, is that if something in, say, Mocha is consuming some transitive dependency that's broken, well, Mocha is going to have to upgrade out of that. Okay, it's not something that the consumer can do.
Yeah, it's a supply chain problem. You're right. It's outside your control.
And so we have people who have these like overzealous security policies that mean they have to pass the audit checks coming into the open source project's issue tracker and demanding that the stuff gets upgraded. Maybe that turns out to be like 100 Dependabot or Renovate or whatever PRs like every week. I don't know, but it's just like a flood of things. And then people want it to be, so it creates more work for maintainers to try to manage what is essentially busy work because it's just irrelevant. The only real problem is that there's a warning and somebody's like company policy says they can't use the software until it's fixed. And like their builds fail because of it. And that's like not something I can influence. I can certainly say that's stupid. Don't make your build fail on these things. But, you know, I can't do anything about what some random company decides they need to do. And and security people I've seen do take a hardline stance on this stuff. Well, you might as well upgrade, right? You should get used to upgrading. And it's good practice to avoid these vulnerabilities wherever we see them. At one level, that is true, but unless you're paying me to do that, I have no interest in it. And people aren't paying me to do that. And they're not paying open source maintainers to address that.
So I'm going to have Amel continue to foam for just a second. I'm going to skip in line and just add on to that real quickly and say it's not just an NPM problem, like you said, because GitHub's notifications, their whole system does the exact same thing to me all the time. And I'm always like, this is irrelevant code. This is part of my build routine, build step of my assets, which becomes static and it never runs in any sort of capacity where it could be exploited. To their credit, you can click through on those and say like, this is irrelevant. Like you can give them, I'm not sure if they're capturing that feedback, you know, in terms of like learning, probably not, but they're at least allowing you to say, this audit is irrelevant, make it go away. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if that would be compliant with certain orgs policies and stuff, but you don't have to go back and have the open source person just upgrade arbitrarily because I need my audit to pass. I can just go ahead into there and say, and it has like 5 or 6 options of why it may not be relevant. And so that's like, it still annoys me, but at least it gives me a escape hatch. So that's,
there is no escape hatch with NPM. Unless you adopt like third-party tooling that gives you one.
All right, Amel, unleash the wave.
Yeah, no, first of all, just Chris, thank you so much for walking us through that. It was really great to get your summary and then also walk through your pain points, you know, both as an engineer, but also as a maintainer and someone who's been aware of these problems, you know, from the points of view that Dan Abramov also has, right? So for me, like, I feel like we've kind of created this problem for ourselves by not having more crowdsourced. Like the spec is broken in the sense that like it's missing context, right? So where's this code being run and what's the context and how does it link into dev dependency versus production dependency? And like those are inputs to really saying this is actually a vulnerability that matters or isn't, right? And like that's kind of what you were saying. Like that's the missing piece. But like that should just be part of the spec and parts of that data should be crowdsourced and you know, or there should be a consensus or some, I don't know, some way of like saying like, okay, well, like 700 people agree that this is not important, like 90%, over 90, whatever, high number of percentage of people, this number of minimum threshold, right? Like, so similar to like a machine learning training model, usually you want to give it like a score, like, hey, this machine learning algorithm is 80% sure that this is a picture of a cat, right? Like something like that, for saying like, hey, this vulnerability is not applicable to your context, and so it's safe to ignore. And that could just be input. That could just be part of a configuration where you specify like where these dependencies are being used in what context, and then based on that, like you have a customized report output of what's actually a vulnerability to you. Like, I just feel like we can fix this problem for ourselves if we take that approach,
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you think that would work, Chris.
For that some small subset of people, like, it is going to be helpful because it is going to surface an actual vulnerability. And so, yeah, you'd want to know about it. You wouldn't want that information to be squelched because it's not a problem for most people, but it actually is for you. I don't know. I don't know what to do about that. And, I feel like whatever the real, like, end game solution is, it needs to be like a combination of examining your code at rest and examining your code and the runtime and what happens when it runs. And that's going to vary depending on the language and platforms that you use. So JavaScript, as we can see from this whole debacle, you're going to learn more about if a program is actually vulnerable when that code is running, because it will have hit the code. And how do you know if something hits a code path? Well, I think you probably like figure that out with, I can't remember the word for it. It's like proving your code is correct. It's like a way to prove. I can't remember the word for it, but you could like do that with certain languages, but probably not JavaScript. Like, you could prove that, hey, this vulnerable line will get run, or it won't get run, or it could get run, and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But I think like if you're running, say, tests, mm-hmm. that's a great opportunity to do this sort of check for, hey, you're hitting this line in Lodash version whatnot, and it's bad. Right. I think we could build tools like that.
Yeah, it's like a world of opportunity. It's such a hard problem to solve as with one turnkey solution, right? Like, it's like a multifaceted approach. And so I think solving each segment alone is valuable, but it feels like I don't know, maybe it alone doesn't, maybe not enough of a commercial value for companies to pop up and service it. Like, I don't know, it's kind of like an all or nothing situation, Like, I think that's maybe why this problem hasn't been solved yet, quite frankly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure there's really a big incentive, and maybe there's
not an incentive enough.
Like for NPM to devote resources to mm-hmm. do something here. Mm-hmm. Do they want to be in the market? Do they want to really compete with Snyk or whatever?
Mm-hmm. Right. NPM at this point is basically just GitHub, but I think it's interesting that the focus is on like AI spitting out your code, having a copilot.
Yeah. Writing my bugs for me.
Yeah. Because they, it's similar to kind of like, GitHub should be invested in the ecosystem because the ecosystem is what feeds them, right? Like a healthy developer ecosystem, healthy open source ecosystem, whatever the hell else, so they would be the perfect people to tackle this problem deeply because they have the resources to do it and the connections and the whatever, all of that stuff. This would be an area for them to, I think, like demonstrate some leadership. I hope they do. So we'll see.
So Dan did post 3 kind of quasi solutions or workarounds, mm-hmm. none of which, a couple of what we've discussed here, none of which are spectacular. I think short term, what NPM should do is cut a new version of the client and just disable the default, right? Let us opt into this versus opt out. Probably they're not going to do that, but I think that would at least take care of the crying of the wolf. And, if you want someone to yell at you, then you have to pass the flag.
NPM's been making some pretty bold changes lately, like some very aggressive ones, like, for example, the peer dependencies, being installed for you in V7. I don't know if y'all, Chris, you're aware of this, So basically like V7 is potentially a massively breaking change for like lots of people because of this, peer dependency install, or
What are
like
the implications
bundle
of that?
sizes getting increased or whatever else. It's that like if you have missing or incorrect version, I think, of the peer dependency, it's now going to auto install it for you versus just warning, where people like get the warning and maybe they fix it, maybe they don't. But like something's behaving potentially differently now, Like I think this should have been in the spec from the beginning. But retroactively adding it now is, I think, potentially really reckless.
I thought it used to do this, and they changed it not to because of dependency hell. I don't know the issues off the top of my head, and then now they're changing it back for, I have no idea why. And I have no idea why they disabled it in the first place, other than it was causing problems when there's, I think, just the mismatches between peer dependencies. Like if you have dependency A, which depends on B version 5, and you have dependency C, which depends on B version 6, then there's like, you're stuck because you need peer dependencies of both 5 and 6 of B, and you can only install one of them. And I don't know what they're doing about that now. I don't, so.
Yeah, I mean, but that's the thing. It's like changing the spec at this stage, like at the scale that they're at, like, oof, I don't know, I mean, the reality is most people who use NPM upgrade with their Node version. Rarely does the average company set of users do an npm install -g npm, because npm is an npm package, by the way. I know it's super meta, but npm install -g npm is like what you use to like bump your version of npm, which doesn't depend on the version of Node. And so it's like people aren't going to start hitting this until they get to like later Node versions where it's been cut with v7. So it could be a slow rolling like discovery, and that's why it's really like you need to be really responsible when you have a tool that's that widely adopted and used. Like you can't just do things that are even mildly risky. You have to be conservative, and that's why I just feel like with this change, and the peer dependency thing, I don't know. There's just been some. I mean, whatever. I mean, I have some interesting insight into, I think, some of the cultural changes since the acquisition, which could be attributed to this, but like, I think things are just a little too rogue for something that's that widely used, in my opinion. So.
Yeah. I mean, I do want them to turn it off, right? But that's probably gonna break somebody, right? Yeah, like changing defaults. You don't want to change defaults.
That's what I'm saying. You don't at all. You should try to preserve backwards compatibility as much as possible, like with your life almost. You know what I mean? Like, so, what? Somebody made a comment recently about how scripting tools like NPM and a CLI or whatever, like these like little JavaScript modules that we write, and there's people who have hundreds of JavaScript packages. Well, scripting is in particular, it's a very unique type of engineering. It's like there's a whole different set of constraints that they need to think about when like when you're connecting with the OS. And you have to manage like their dependency tree and matrix is like quite large, like there's lots of different variations of like considerations to take into place. So it's a hard job. I don't envy those engineers. So kudos. It's easy for us to judge, but I know it's it's a hard job. So
well, to be continued. I guess we'll find out what happens next in this saga. Likely nothing on this front in particular. Maybe just some more discussion, a little hemming and hawing. We'd love to know what you think as a listener. Definitely hit us up. You can comment on changelog.com. You can send us a tweet at JSPartyFM. You can hit us up in the Slack. Of course, 2 things I wanted to note before we call it a day. The first one, we are gearing up for Front End Feud. We have a very special, what I think will be a very exciting episode of Front End Feud in the works, but we need your help. Of course, Front End Feud is our survey-based show, a lot like Family Feud, and we need to have the survey says. So we need more people to take the Front End Feud survey. We have 55 respondents. We're trying to get to 100. You can find it at jsparty.fm/ff, and one lucky respondent will win a free JS Party t-shirt. That's the very one I'm wearing right here. If you're watching the video, it's very comfortable. You want to go to there. So please help us out, fill out that survey, and make Front End Feud awesome. And then secondly, we do take requests. So we'd love to hear what you would like to hear, guests or topics you want to have on the show. So you can let us know at jsparty.fm/request. We'd be happy to do episodes that are requested by the listeners. Those are the two things. That's all we got for today. Chris and Amel, thanks for hanging out and sharing your knowledge and wisdom. That's JS Party for this week. We'll talk to you next time. Thank you for listening to JS Party. We have a bundle of awesome podcasts for you at changelog.com. That includes our brand new show, Ship It, with Gerhard Lazou, a podcast about getting your best ideas into the world and seeing what happens. It's about the code, the ops, the infra, and the people that make it happen. Yes, we focus on the people because everything else is an implementation detail. Subscribe now at changelog.com/shipit, or simply search for Ship It in your favorite podcast app. You'll find it. JS Party is produced by Jared Santo with music by Breakmaster Cylinder. We're brought to you by Fastly, LaunchDarkly, and Linode. Next up on the pod, we're tripping through a wormhole as Faraz walks us through all the crazy tech he dreamed up on his latest web app. That episode will be hitting your podcast feed next week.